An old photograph that fell from his assistant Sarah's desk turned Marcus's world upside down. The photo showed a 7 or 8-year-old girl, and in the background was the special dollhouse Marcus had bought just for his daughter, Emma. But Sarah was only 25, and Emma was only 3 when she disappeared. How was that possible? Marcus Chen stood frozen in his corner office on the 47th floor of Chen Technologies, staring at the photograph that had just fallen from his assistant's bag. The image showed a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing beside what looked unmistakably like the custom-made dollhouse he had commissioned for his daughter Emma 20 years ago. But that was impossible. Sarah was only 25, and Emma had disappeared when she was just 3 years old. The photograph trembled in Marcus's withered hands as memories came flooding back like a broken dam. 20 years ago, he had been a different man. Young, ambitious, but still believing that family came before fortune. He remembered every detail of that dollhouse, how he had spent months designing it with a local craftsman, adding secret compartments and tiny LED lights that would make Emma's eyes sparkle with wonder. Sarah Mitchell had been working as his executive assistant for 6 months now. She was efficient, intelligent, and had an uncanny ability to anticipate his needs before he even voiced them. But there had always been something familiar about her, something that made him pause whenever she smiled or laughed. Now, holding this photograph, that familiar feeling transformed into something much more profound and terrifying. Marcus had built Chen Technologies from nothing into a $40 billion empire. He owned properties on 3 continents, employed over 50,000 people, and his name was synonymous with innovation in artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Yet none of that mattered as he stared at this simple photograph that threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew about his life. The story began 20 years earlier. Marcus had been 35 then, married to his college sweetheart Elena, and they had just welcomed their daughter Emma into the world. Life was perfect, or so it seemed. Marcus was running a small tech startup from their garage, working 18-hour days to secure funding while Elena managed their home and cared for Emma. But success came with a price. As Chen Technologies grew, Marcus found himself traveling constantly, missing bedtime stories, first steps, and precious moments that could never be reclaimed. Elena began to feel like a single mother, raising Emma while her husband chased his dreams across the globe. The breaking point came when Emma turned 3. Marcus had promised to be home for her birthday party, but a last-minute crisis with their biggest investor kept him in Tokyo for an extra week. Elena's voice over the phone that night was different, colder. She told him she needed time to think, that she was taking Emma to her mother's house in Oregon for a few weeks. That was the last time Marcus heard his wife's voice. 3 days later, Elena and Emma vanished without a trace. The police investigation revealed that Elena had withdrawn their savings, closed their joint accounts, and disappeared with their daughter. There was no kidnapping, no crime to investigate. Just a mother who had decided to start a new life somewhere else, far from the husband who had chosen success over family. Marcus hired the best private investigators money could buy. For years, he chased every lead, followed every rumor, spent millions trying to find his missing family. But Elena had planned their disappearance carefully. She had help, resources, and most importantly, she had every reason to stay hidden from a man she believed would never prioritize their family over his empire. As the years passed, Marcus threw himself into his work with renewed intensity. Building Chen Technologies became more than just business, it became his way of dealing with the crushing guilt and grief. Every success, every billion added to his net worth, was both a triumph and a reminder of what he had lost. Now, 20 years later, Sarah stood in his office doorway, her face pale with concern. She had come to collect the contracts for the Singapore merger, the deal that would make Marcus the 5th richest person in the world. But all Marcus could do was stare at the photograph in his hands. "Mr. Chen," Sarah said softly, "is everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus looked up at her, really looked at her for the first time in months. The shape of her nose, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the small scar above her left eyebrow. How had he missed it before? How had he not seen what was right in front of him? "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, Where did you get this photograph? Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what had happened. She rushed forward and knelt beside her bag, frantically searching through the scattered contents. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That fell out? I didn't mean for you to see that. It's just something personal, from when I was a kid. From when you were a kid, Marcus repeated slowly. Sarah, how old are you in this picture? I don't know, maybe 7 or 8. Why does it matter? Sarah was clearly uncomfortable, trying to gather her things and escape what had become an incredibly awkward situation. But Marcus wasn't about to let her leave. Not now. Not when he might finally have the answer to the question that had haunted him for 2 decades. Sarah, I need you to sit down. We need to talk. Something in his tone made Sarah stop her frantic packing. She looked at Marcus, saw the intensity in his eyes, and slowly lowered herself into the chair across from his desk. That dollhouse in the background of this photograph, Marcus continued, it's very distinctive. Custom made, with specific details that would be impossible to replicate by accident. Sarah, I need you to tell me everything you know about your childhood. Everything. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus's face. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. I don't remember much from when I was really little. My mom, she said we moved around a lot when I was young. She told me my father wasn't in the picture, that it was always just the 2 of us. Your mother's name was Elena? The color drained from Sarah's face. How did you know that? I never told you my mother's name. Marcus reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a file he hadn't opened in years. Inside were dozens of photographs, documents, and memories from his life with Elena and Emma. He selected one specific photo and placed it on the desk between them. The photograph showed a younger Marcus holding a baby girl while a beautiful woman with dark hair smiled beside them. The woman was unmistakably a younger version of the person Sarah had grown up calling mother. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice breaking with emotion he had suppressed for decades, I think you're my daughter. I think you're Emma. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at the photograph, then at Marcus, then back at the photograph. Her hands shook as she picked up the image, tracing the faces with her fingertip. That's impossible, she whispered. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm from Portland. My mother died 3 years ago in a car accident. She never mentioned anyone named Marcus or Chen. Your mother changed your name when you disappeared. She changed everything to keep you safe from me. But look at this picture, Sarah. Look at your eyes, your features. Look at the baby in my arms and tell me you don't see the resemblance. Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face as 25 years of carefully constructed identity began to crumble. She told me my father didn't want us. She said he was too busy with his career to care about having a family. She was right, Marcus admitted, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. I was too busy. I was young and stupid and I thought I could have everything, success and family, without making any sacrifices. I thought there would always be time later to be the father and husband you both deserved. By the time I realized how wrong I was, it was too late. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city he had conquered but that had never felt more empty than it did right now. Your mother, Elena, she tried to reach me. She called my office dozens of times, left messages I never received because I was always traveling, always in meetings, always chasing the next deal. When you both disappeared, I hired investigators, spent millions trying to find you. But Elena was smart. She created new identities, new lives, and she made sure I would never find you unless you wanted to be found. Sarah wiped her tears and looked up at him. Why now? Why are you telling me this now? Because in 6 hours, I'm supposed to sign the papers that will sell Chen Technologies to a consortium of investors. I'll walk away with $47 billion, more money than any person could spend in 10 lifetimes. But what's the point of all that wealth if I'm still the same man who lost his family because he couldn't see what really mattered? Marcus turned back to face Sarah, and for the first time in 20 years, he allowed himself to really see his daughter. She had Elena's grace and intelligence, but she had his determination and his eyes. She was everything he had imagined she might become, and so much more. Sarah, Emma, whoever you choose to be, Marcus continued, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to call me father or welcome me into your life with open arms. I failed you when you were 3 years old, and I've been failing you every day since. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be the father I should have been 20 years ago. Sarah stood up slowly, still holding the photograph of her as a baby. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to think. This changes everything I thought I knew about myself, about my life. I know it's overwhelming. And I know this is the worst possible timing. But Sarah, I need you to know that finding you, even like this, even after all these years, means more to me than every deal I've ever closed, every success I've ever achieved. Sarah walked over to the window and stood beside Marcus, both of them looking out at the city below. My mother, Elena, she never spoke badly of you. Even when I asked questions about my father, she would just say that some people are called to do big things in the world, and that you were one of those people. She said that didn't make you a bad person, just someone who had different priorities. She was more generous than I deserved. She was dying when she told me about the dollhouse, Sarah said suddenly. It was one of the last conversations we had. She said that when I was little, I had this dollhouse that I loved more than anything else in the world. She said it was custom made by someone who loved me very much, but that we had to leave it behind when we moved. She made me promise that if I ever found myself in a situation where I needed to make a choice between success and love, I would choose love. Marcus felt his knees go weak. She kept the photograph all these years. She kept everything. There's a storage unit in Portland with boxes of things from our old life. Pictures, documents, even some of my toys from when I was little. She said someday I might want to know where I came from, and when that day came, I would have the choice to seek out the truth or leave the past buried. And what did you choose? Sarah smiled through her tears. I chose to come work for you. I chose to come work for Marcus Chen. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. You knew? You knew who I was when you applied for this job. I suspected. When I was in college, I did research on Chen Technologies for a class project. When I saw your photograph, something clicked. The way you looked, the way you carried yourself, it reminded me of the man in the baby pictures my mother had kept. But I needed to be sure, and I needed to understand what kind of person you had become. So you got yourself hired as my assistant. I got myself hired as your assistant, Sarah confirmed. And for 6 months, I've been watching you, trying to decide if the man my mother fell in love with still existed somewhere underneath the billionaire CEO. Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. His daughter had infiltrated his company, spent months evaluating his character, all while he remained completely oblivious. And what did you decide? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. I decided that you're not the same man who was too busy to come home for his daughter's birthday party. But I also decided that you're not completely different either. You still work too much, you still put business before personal relationships, and you still have a tendency to try to solve emotional problems with money. That's a fair assessment, Marcus admitted. But, Sarah continued, I also saw you personally deliver flowers to Mrs. Rodriguez in accounting when her husband died, even though you barely knew her. I saw you quietly pay for the medical expenses of the janitor's son when he was diagnosed with leukemia. I saw you turn down the Henderson acquisition because it would have meant laying off 3,000 workers right before Christmas. Marcus was surprised she had noticed those things. He had always tried to keep his charitable acts private, partly out of humility and partly because he didn't want to be seen as soft in the cutthroat world of corporate business. Those things matter, Sarah said. They show me that somewhere inside the billionaire CEO is still the man who spent months designing a dollhouse for his 3-year-old daughter. The intercom on Marcus's desk buzzed, interrupting their conversation. Mr. Chen, came his secretary's voice, the Singapore delegation has arrived. They're waiting in conference room A. Marcus looked at Sarah, then at the contracts on his desk, then back at his daughter. In 6 months of working together, she had never steered him wrong. Her advice had saved him millions, her insights had opened new markets, her presence had made even the most stressful days bearable. Now he understood why. She wasn't just a brilliant assistant, she was his daughter, carrying the intelligence and intuition she had inherited from both him and Elena. "Sarah," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "Should I sign this deal? Should I sell Chen Technologies and walk away with $47 billion? Sarah considered the question seriously. "Why do you want to sell?" "Because I'm 55 years old, I've been working nonstop for 30 years, and I thought it was time to enjoy the fruits of my labor. Because I've proven everything I needed to prove, conquered every mountain I set out to climb." "And what would you do with $47 billion and unlimited free time?" Marcus realized he had no answer to that question. For months, he had been planning this sale as if it were the logical conclusion to his career, but he had never actually thought about what would come next. "I don't know," he admitted. "Then maybe you shouldn't sell," Sarah said simply. "Maybe instead of cashing out and walking away, you should think about what Chen Technologies could become with a leader who has finally learned the difference between success and fulfillment." Marcus looked at his daughter and felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years, hope for the future that wasn't measured in dollars or market share. "Sarah, I want to make you an offer. But before I do, I need you to know that this has nothing to do with you being my daughter. This is about you being the most brilliant person I've ever worked with, and the only person who has ever made me question my priorities in a way that made me better instead of bitter." "What kind of offer?" "I want to make you Chief Operating Officer of Chen Technologies. I want to restructure the company around the values that your mother tried to teach me 20 years ago. I want to build something that proves business can be both profitable and purposeful. And I want to do it with my daughter by my side, if she'll have me." Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the city below. When she finally spoke, her voice was strong and clear. "On one condition." "Name it." "We established the Elena Chen Foundation for families affected by separation and divorce. We use company resources to help other children who have been separated from their parents, whether by circumstance, choice, or tragedy." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Your mother would love that. My mother would love to know that her sacrifice meant something. That losing 20 years with you wasn't just a tragedy, but also the foundation for something that could help other families stay together." The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Chen, the Singapore delegation is asking if you're ready to proceed." Marcus looked at Sarah, at his daughter, at the brilliant woman who had spent 6 months teaching him what he should have learned 20 years ago. "Tell them the deal is off. Chen Technologies is not for sale." Sarah smiled, and for the first time since she was 3 years old, Marcus Chen felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the lobby of Chen Technologies, watching workers install a bronze plaque next to the elevator bank. The plaque read, "Elena Chen Foundation for Family Reunification. In memory of Elena Mitchell Chen, who taught us that love is the only success that truly matters." Sarah, now COO and officially Sarah Chen once again, stood beside him. She had chosen to reclaim her original name not just as a symbolic gesture, but as a practical one. The Chen name carried weight in the business world, and she intended to use that influence to build something meaningful. "She would be proud," Sarah said, placing her hand on Marcus's arm. "She would be amazed," Marcus replied. Amazed that her stubborn, workaholic husband finally learned how to put family first. The foundation had already helped reunite over 200 families in its first 6 months of operation. They provided resources for private investigators, legal assistance for custody disputes, and counseling services for families dealing with separation. It was the most rewarding work Marcus had ever done, and the only business venture that had ever felt like a calling rather than just a career. Chen Technologies was thriving under their joint leadership. Sarah's ideas about corporate responsibility and employee welfare had not only improved morale but had actually increased productivity and profitability. The company was on track to have its best year ever, proving that doing good and doing well were not mutually exclusive. "I have something for you," Sarah said, reaching into her briefcase and pulling out a small wrapped package. Marcus opened it carefully and found himself holding a miniature version of the dollhouse he had commissioned 25 years earlier. Every detail was perfect, from the tiny LED lights to the secret compartments he had designed for Emma's treasures. "I had it reconstructed from the original blueprints," Sarah explained. "The craftsman who made the original one kept detailed records. His son runs the business now, and he was honored to recreate his father's work." Marcus turned the miniature dollhouse over in his hands, marveling at the craftsmanship. "It's perfect." "But why?" "Because some treasures are worth preserving, even if we have to rebuild them from memory. Because the love that went into creating something beautiful doesn't disappear just because the original is lost. And because I wanted you to know that I remember." "You remember?" "Not everything, but pieces. I remember feeling safe and loved. I remember someone reading me stories and singing me songs. I remember believing that I was the most important person in someone's world, even if I didn't understand who that someone was." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever he thought about the years they had lost. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for more of those memories." "You're here now," Sarah said simply. "And we have time to make new ones." As they walked toward the elevator, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had spent 20 years building an empire, accumulating wealth, and achieving success by every traditional measure. But none of that had brought him the satisfaction he felt right now, walking through the lobby of his company with his daughter by his side, knowing that their work was making a real difference in the world. The photograph that had fallen from Sarah's bag 6 months ago now sat framed on Marcus's desk, right next to a more recent picture of him and Sarah at the foundation's first fundraising gala. In the newer photo, they were both smiling, but more than that, they looked like they belonged together. They looked like family. That evening, Marcus sat in his study at home, a place that had once felt like a shrine to his professional achievements but now felt like a real home for the first time in decades. Sarah had moved into the guest house on his property, giving them both the space they needed while still allowing them to rebuild their relationship gradually. His phone rang, and Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Dad," she said, and Marcus still felt a thrill every time she used that word. "Hi, sweetheart. How was your day?" "Good. I wanted to let you know that the Peterson family called. Remember the case we've been working on, the father who lost contact with his son 15 years ago?" "Of course. We found him. The son, I mean. He's been living in Seattle, and he's been looking for his father too. They're going to meet next week." Marcus smiled, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from knowing their work was changing lives. "That's wonderful news." "It is." "And Dad?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that it's never too late to come home." After they hung up, Marcus walked out onto his balcony and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Elena was watching over them, proud of the man he had become and the relationship he had rebuilt with their daughter. He had spent 20 years believing that success was measured by what you accumulated, but now he understood that true success was measured by what you were willing to give up for the people you loved. Marcus Chen had lost his family because he chose business over love. But sometimes, if you're very lucky and very patient, life gives you a second chance to get it right. And sometimes, that second chance comes in the form of a photograph falling from your daughter's bag, revealing that the most important deal of your life was the one you thought you'd lost forever. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the office early, as had been his habit for decades. But instead of immediately diving into emails and reports, he took a moment to look around at what he and Sarah had built together. The walls were lined with photographs from foundation events, letters from reunited families, and awards recognizing Chen Technology's commitment to corporate social responsibility. It wasn't the legacy he had planned when he first started the company, but it was the legacy he was meant to leave. And the best part was that it was a legacy he was building with his daughter, proving that some dreams are worth waiting 20 years to come true. In his desk drawer, Marcus kept a copy of Elena's last letter to Sarah, the one she had written before her death 3 years earlier. Sarah had shared it with him a few months ago, and one passage in particular had become his guiding principle. Remember, my darling girl, that success without love is just an elaborate form of failure. Your father will learn this someday, and when he does, I hope you'll be there to help him understand what real wealth looks like. Elena had been right, as she so often was. Real wealth wasn't measured in billions of dollars or corporate acquisitions. Real wealth was measured in relationships restored, families reunited, and love finally given the priority it deserved. As Sarah walked into his office that morning with 2 cups of coffee and a smile that lit up the room, Marcus Chen realized that he was, by any measure that truly mattered, the richest man in the world.